Christina Wodtke, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking me. I can't wait to talk about all the things.
This is a conversation for me that's been 20 plus years in the making.
Wow.
Where I've hoped to, we've passed by each other at various conferences around the years. I may have said hello,
Yes.
but I think I mentioned to you for a long, long time earlier in my career, I was a little intimidated to say hello, which I don't know, somewhere along the line, that's just changed. So
Thank
hello,
God.
thank you. Many reasons I'm so excited to have you on today, but we're going to talk about career journeys and lessons learned. And I've been following your career and your writing for years and years. It has been close to 20 years. And you've spoken about many things. You've spoken about information architecture best practices. You've spoken about presenting clearly, your book on radical focus, but you've also written quite a bit about career journeys and what we should all be thinking about. So I'd love to delve into all of that. But to start, my first unfair question for those of my listeners who haven't been following you like I have, can you share the story of your life and career in a couple of minutes for us? I'm sure that will be really easy for you.
I was going to say, how much time do I have? Yeah, I was an art school kid. I graduated in photography and video, which was where I first started working with computers, with computer altered photography. And then I moved to San Francisco and spent 5 years painting and waiting tables, living the life of the artist. I really wanted to try to give that a shot. Was not very successful. My only show was at a pizza place. It was more pizza than the gallery. But then a friend of my boyfriend at the time said, "Hey, you want to create a Yahoo killer with CNET?" And I was like, how hard can it be? And I got they used me to basically build a directory, which meant I would see and review 50 websites a week. And I started going, how hard is this to build? And I taught myself HTML, became part of Web Girls, which was a movement back in the early web days to help each other succeed. Got my first job at a startup. I was going to go down the engineering route, and the design director said, "I love what you say in our reviews. Can you join us? What do you want to be?" And I was like, information architect, because I just read Lou and Peter's book. And from there, it's kind of a long journey of how do I make good products? Because I kept getting frustrated. I was like, well, we can't make good products. So maybe if I was a product manager, or maybe if I was a manager, or maybe I was head of design, like I kept moving around within. I'm very lucky that my career progressed. I'm very curious and very passionate from one thing to the next, from the startup to a consultancy to my own startup, selling that to LinkedIn, from LinkedIn to MySpace and then to Zynga. It was always just like, I want to learn things and I want to make a difference. But I found out at one point, finally at the level of GM, that really there's no king, right? In business, there's nobody who just, even the CEO, he can't just say, make it this way, because it has bad repercussions. And also he has a board he has to report to, and the board can't say anything because they're just too far away from every day. So the kind of the realization that I couldn't do anything. And then I also got burned out. The tech industry is just brutal, and being a mom is really hard. And I wanted to see my child grow up, got divorced. And so I had 50-50 custody. And it just felt too painful when I did have my daughter to not have to be working till 3 a.m. because my boss would be DMing me then. So I ended up quitting Zynga, rage quit. I was also very sick of Zynga's ethical practices, having a hard time with that. And then I just kind of laid on the floor for a little bit. LinkedIn and had just gone IPO. So I had a little bit of money, not life-changing money, not fuck you money, but money, enough money that I could take a pause. And that was worth it. That was the best thing I've ever spent my time on, because I took a little pause. And being a lean startup person, I started thinking, well, this is a big shift. How can I test some ideas to figure out what I want to do next? I ended up going to culinary school for 6 weeks, which was really amazing. Learned my body is too old to be a chef. It's really hard. I worked with a food startup for a while, realized that the margins make it a very tough business to be in. It made me uncomfortable. I was like, if I stay in the food industry, I'm going to hate food pretty quickly, and I love food. So then I thought, well, maybe I'll teach. I know a lot of people who say, I'm going to be a teacher now. Let me go back and get my PhD. But I was just like, oh, where can I test this idea? And General Assembly, which is, your classic boot camp, they wanted somebody to help design the UX program. So I went in and designed that with Anne Valencia and taught for a month. And I was like, okay, I like this. This is kind of exciting. And then I did another one and I liked it more. But I kind of felt like the emphasis at General Assembly was on money, because they are for profit. And so I reached out to my network And I said, where could I teach? Got an introduction to Christian Simsarian at CCA. CCA is 110, 115-year-old art school. It's a really wonderful place. It's got a good interaction design department. Taught there for a few years. And then Julie Stanford, who I networked, networks are everything, right? Networks are how you get advice. It's how you get your next job. She said, hey, they're hiring at Stanford. You want to go for a job share? And I did that. And then a couple of years in, I'm like, I love it. I'm home. I'm happy. Stanford's where I want to be. Went to 100% and haven't looked back since.
Christina, thank you. You did it. You summarized your career, your 20 plus, 30 plus year career in a couple minutes. I have so much I want to ask you about those threads in your
Sure.
career. I've been, during my career inflection point, working with women who are trying to figure out what's next in their career and lives. And a lot of them will start out by saying, I want to plan. I want to think this through. I want to be reading. I want to take classes. You spoke to something that I'm hearing is really, really different that's worked for you, where you're not taking all of this time to plan methodically. You're taking action. You spoke about lean experiments. Can you speak to that a little bit? Has that always been in your nature, just to figure out what are those lean experiments you can do and just acting?
But it's not in my nature. I grew up like any kid who got an idea of who I was. I'm an artist. And I was very trapped in that mindset. I remember the first time I got a job inside of a real company. And restaurant workers, there's this myth that we can do our passion and we get time off in the middle of the week when there aren't so many people around. And they talk about how wonderful being in the restaurant is and what fools office workers are. And I went into work in an office and I was like, this is nice. Actually, this is pretty awesome. I love working with other people who are interested in the same things as me. I liked the rhythm of the day. I liked having weekends off. It was kind of crazy when I could see people. So I think that we get these ideas in our head, and until they're questioned, we get stuck in them unless we do something. And I think there's a lot of ideas about how an experience is that are very different than the experience. If you can go out and have the experience, you can know a lot more. And that's what my experiments were. You know, I did lean startup. I was deep into it from the beginning. And that idea of coming up with hypotheses and then finding the smallest possible thing you can do to test it is so effective. And I think it's even more effective for your personal life because you're rating it off of, am I happy? Am I intrigued? Am I enjoying this? You know, it's very easy to collect the data on your own personal opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I wondered, it's asking you to think back a lot, but back to when you were sharing your artwork in the pizza restaurant and you thought you would be an artist and that would be your career trajectory. You did mention you read Lou and Peter's book on information architecture, and you did make a shift. I'm wondering, has there been any pain along the way, like that identity growing up of being an artist and then shifting into tech in IA? Was there pain at that point for you? Or do you still feel like you're an artist at heart? Like, where are you at with that?
I think I didn't have a lot of pain in that shift. I know a lot of people who have a big painful shift when they leave design for product management or for management in general. But for me, that particular shift, I felt relieved and kind of angry because I felt like I'd been sold this idea of what it meant to live the artist's life. And I knew I was going to be poor. I joked that going to art school taught me that I would be eating ramen for the rest of my life. You know, having that moment to step into another world, and I was more joyful because I was discovering, and I felt very creative. And what's amazing is I found so many things from art school actually applied to my work. I started out as a categorizer of gift cards because it was a greeting card company, and then moved my way into the front end engineering and then eventually into IA. And I was just always following my curiosity, like what's interesting, what's needed here. And there's an intersection between my own personal curiosity and what the business needs. And I'm always successful in that space. I think the only time I felt a little shaken is, I think when I moved to product management from, you know, I was a CEO of my own company and I sold to LinkedIn and I became a product manager. Reed actually gave me a choice. He said, you can either go back to design, because that seems to be where most of your career is, or since you've been a CEO, go into product. And I did just go to product. And I feel like product management is really hard in a lot of ways that people don't realize, especially in a small company like a startup. Like the fact that you really are responsible for outcomes in a way you're never responsible as a designer. As a designer, you are responsible for creating quality work, but quality is determined internally, right? It's determined by your boss, your fellow designers, your team. Then when you're product managers, all of a sudden, like, if that number goes down, it's you. It doesn't matter if it was Google just launching something. You got to figure out what to do. Everything's responsible for it. And honestly, I found that exhausting. That was part of it.
Yeah.
Because you take that, and then I became a general manager at MySpace and a general manager at Zynga. That's even more so. You are responsible for absolutely everything, whether it's under control or not. Eventually, that stress just wore at me. Now that I'm at Stanford and I'm teaching design, I teach design, product management, game design. When I'm teaching design, I get to be this soft, you are creative. I know you're CS students, but look, let's do this, let's do this, and look at all the amazing things you're doing. And I love that part of me. That's the part of me I love, as opposed to the tough, we have to hit this numbers, you're not performing. I can do all that stuff, but it reduces the joy in my life. And when I teach product management right now, I'm really torn between the two Christinas. There's the incredibly tough Christina, who's all about the numbers and you better know your shit. And then there's the gentler design Christina that's about, I believe in evidence-based design, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But there's another part there, which is about discovering your role as a creative in the world that I love being a midwife to.
I'm wondering, you teach designers and product managers. You've been in both roles. You've been in leadership in both of those roles. I've always wondered, admittedly, when I think back into my career leading up UX teams, one of the groups I had the biggest challenges with oftentimes were the product managers and the product leaders. And I now, looking back on my career, I sometimes thought it would have been really, really beneficial for me to spend a couple of years in the product manager's role and see that challenge and the pain and the pressure so I could have more empathy along the way. I like to think now I have much more empathy. I wonder, when you're working with your students who are leaning toward the design side, is there an element of you encouraging them to really wear that PM hat so they understand both sides of both design and product management?
Well, I do have only 10 weeks. I have learning goals for the class, and then I have secondary learning goals. So I have, for example, take my design for behavior change class. I want to teach you some core concepts in design, which are journey maps, et cetera, but I also want to teach you some core concepts in behavioral economics because you should understand them. And it's also embedded ethics. So we actually have ethics discussions every single week, depending on what sort of thing we're looking at that particular moment in that week. I also believe that if students are working in teams, we should teach them how to be effective in teams. So there's some lessons around creating shared norms and conflict resolution. I think the conflict resolution, the team stuff will lead to a greater ability to work effectively with our partners.
I told you I was going to try to chat about every topic I possibly could in the hour we have together. One thing I did want to ask about, I saw you writing and asking people for feedback on your curriculum for product managers at Stanford. I'm wondering, how many years now have you been teaching the courses, the product management course at Stanford?
Oof. Well, I've been at Stanford almost 9 years now, and product management's been, I think this will be the fourth instance of it. 2020 was because when I taught it the first time, ChatGPT had just launched.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. When you've been asking for feedback on your curriculum and the topics you'll discuss, in what ways are you now seeing ChatGPT had just launched, but the last couple of years have been a lot in terms of the speed and use of AI and Gen AI. How is your curriculum shifting these days now with the advent of LLMs and Gen AI?
I started using generative AI about 2-3 classes ago, and I did it because the very first time I gave the class, it was coming up with a new business from scratch. And that didn't feel like a product management experience to me. It felt like an entrepreneur's experience, and they are different. And so I decided I wanted to create pretend companies. My class is really large. It's the only class for undergrads on product management at Stanford, believe it or not. And so I let it get as big as it wants to get. But because of that, I can't have them work with real companies. I also find that at the undergrad level, it's really important for them to learn the skills first. And I think working with real companies tends to skew the curriculum. And I want to cover a certain base of stuff. And there are some master's classes that they can work with real companies. So I point them, go there next. But so I created these fake companies using ChatGPT, which was so easy and so fast. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then the next year I was like, oh, I did it again. And let's create case studies and I could get real numbers. Well, real fake real numbers. And I was like, holy crap, this is even better. I can put more material for the students. But honestly, this year is the year that I think AI tipped. And I've been watching it for a long time. Since the day I got here, every time I go to a faculty lunch, I'm learning something about AI. So I know a lot about at least the guts of the machine, so to speak. But how it's being used, I feel like this is the moment when everybody, almost everybody, is really looking at their workflows and asking, how can AI improve this? How can it make it faster? How can it make it deeper? How can we explore more ideas? And where do these LLMs fail? Because everybody talks about like they hallucinate, but it sounds like it's a
Yeah.
problem that could get better. It's not going to get better. The simple reality is, I always tell myself, it's a miraculous making shit up machine. And so when I go to an LLM, I'm like, okay, does this job require making shit up? Okay, the answer is yes. I can use it. Number two, does the internet have answers? Because it was trained on the internet. Okay, I can keep moving forward, right? Trust and verify, anything I do. And I've spent a lot of time putting in custom instructions and creating projects that have the data. Like, there's a lot you can do. But I would say one of the biggest problems with LLMs is you go there and it looks like it just works.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. It takes like 6 months to start getting anything of any quality that's not AI slop, depending on how much time you're putting into it. Then you can start getting some real value. But the use cases matter so much. For example, simulation is one of my favorite use cases. There's a researcher around the corner from me, and she's creating a tool for therapists to experience what it's like to talk to high-risk patients, so people who are suicidal or delusional. And that way, the first time they experience it, it won't be in a clinical setting. They can practice. And for me, that's perfect. Getting therapy from a ChatGPT? No. Teaching therapists how to deal with a variety of situations? Yes. These tools can do and what the appropriate situations are. The other one is how. The other question I ask myself is, how bad will it be if I get it wrong?
Yeah.
And that's a big one. I'll ask a quick question about this one TV show that I watched a few years back, and I'm trying to remember the name. Because if it gets it wrong, who cares? Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter.
You're anticipating what I was going to ask you too, in terms of use cases specifically for you. You mentioned that there's some power for professor down the hall using it for simulations for potential therapists to see that. You said you're getting help to create your case studies for your students. Are there other use cases you're using Gen AI for now that you didn't anticipate that you're doing all the time? And if so, why?
I mean, for the class, I'm transforming the class. There's going to be AI throughout. There's no way I can say don't use AI. So all I can do is say, don't suck. Like, I don't care if you use AI, but don't suck. If you suck, we got a problem. I'm also going to tell them about product sense and the fact that I feel like using AI will reduce their product sense. And that's something they will be interviewed on. Product management class is very much about getting a job, which is a little antithetical to Stanford's point of view. Stanford's point of view is we will teach you the big ideas and then you'll be fine. But I'm trying to get them ready to step into this. So we're going to use AI for a lot of reasons. We're going to have to talk about, like, if you use it for market research, how are you going to validate that these are real numbers? How are you going to validate that these are real companies? Can you use it to synthesize your user research? You're going to go out and do interviews. Well, first of all, don't have AI do your interviews because it's kind of insulting to your customers. But also the things you hear, the things you experience will improve your product sense. Then there's the problem of, can it do your synthesis? It can, but if you skip inhabiting the data, which is the ethnography term, you won't be changing your brain. You'll have some answers you can act on, but you won't be improving your product sense. So when do you make a choice? The other thing is that, from what I understand from everybody, you tried it with synthesis, is you get maybe 30% of the potential out of it, as opposed to 80 if you do it yourself. So I'm going to have the students do it themselves first, then have the LLM do it, and then compare and see, so they can like viscerally experience the difference.
I'm so glad you're speaking to this, Christina, because it's something that I just won't stop talking about when I'm discussing synthesis or research analysis. The whole point of research, sure, we want to run the research, but the whole point is to have the teams, the product teams, immersed in the research so they take action. If they're not part of that discovery work, they're not immersed. They don't have the information to take action. And it sounds like you're telling your students exactly the same, that you can do it, but should you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very much.
absolutely.
And there'll be a moment where you're in a huge hurry. Maybe it doesn't matter that much and you could skip it, but you don't want a habit of skipping it. One thing I find really weird, and as a researcher, I'm sure you have seen this, is, wow, people are afraid to talk to other human beings. It's crazy. Like with my students, I have to kick their asses to go out and talk to other human beings. And I've seen people come up with reasons like, oh, they don't want to see their idea poo-pooed, but that's not true. There's just literally a barrier to step out and talk to a stranger. And I think that the faster we can get them used to that, the easier it'll be for them later. So they do a lot of research.
Your recent article about I love generative AI and hate the companies building it. So let's talk about it. What led you to running this research? Let's talk about in writing this article. Why even go here, starting to rank the evil or not so evil of the biggest AI companies? Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. I'm in a really unique position as somebody at Stanford. I don't have tenure because I'm a lecturer and all that, but I pretty much will not get fired unless I do something egregious, right? It's not like the terror I had. I had no idea how horrible it was in tech to always be afraid you're about to get fired or laid off. And suddenly I don't. And I feel like I can do so much better work. So I was like, I finally allowed myself to own my own moral framework. Like before working in tech, I always felt like it was nibbling away at it. And I felt I had to always compromise. So I was like, okay, what do I think? AI, I'd come to the conclusion it was arriving. It was arriving hard. I came to the conclusion that I need to figure out what it would mean for design and product management. And that the question became, there are these foundation models. Which one can I use? And I wanted to use one that was not evil. I wanted one preferably that wasn't trained on copyright because I'm an author. And for me to use, it's very weird as an author to use a tool that's been trained illegally on your material. So it's so ethically upsetting. So I thought, okay, actually it started with LinkedIn. I was on LinkedIn and I was getting all these AI hype posts all the time, hype. And then I saw something from Timit Geru and I had a physical experience, which was cognitive dissonance. I don't want to read this. My stomach hurts. I don't like it. And I was like, oh God, I've become brainwashed. So I started following as many ethicists and people I could. And that changed me as well because I wanted to have an even information diet of hypers and doomers and everything in between. So I went out and just researched the fuck out of them. I've been collecting little articles anyway. So that's why I knew about XAI in Memphis. That's why I knew about the Weird Delusions the Empire of AI. That book is so good. I cannot recommend it too highly. And that led me to a lot of paths I could chase down. And I just kept going. And I wanted to write it in a way that the people who are excited about AI could hear me because I knew if I said AI evil, then people wouldn't read it. So I had to make sure that people really understood that I thought it was the niftiest thing ever, which I do. And it's built on yuck. And so how much yuck can I get out of my system? And when people say, oh, so-and-so is cheaper right now, I'm like, no, Claude is the least evil. I will pay a little bit more money for less evil. And if something comes along, like it looks like may happen, I will switch again. But I won't switch to somebody like a Grok or a Meta because they're just beyond all imagining bad.
Well, what I appreciate, Christina, too, with your article and the research you've done, unlike many thought leaders or hype out there, there's nuance in your discourse. You're not just saying, oh, AI is evil or, oh, ChatGPT is evil. You've put together very clear criteria that you are assessing these companies across, and it's really, really well thought. I'd love to hear because I can tell, but you're using Claude, right? You're using Anthropic for the most part.
Yep.
And why is that? Like, you're not saying, you said it's the least evil of the bunch, but if we're thinking about, I use Claude and I use ChatGPT 5 still, but what considerations are clear?
Yeah. So I just finally unsubscribed, which I may break down and resubscribe because they're the only ones who do custom GPPs, but we'll see, from OpenAI.
So you were still using it?
Yeah, I still use it. I would use it for stupid queries. Like there's this really weird habit I had, which if I had to do anything big and thoughtful, I do it with Claude. And if I wanted to know about a TV show or my kid, we were driving and she asked, who picks up the roadkill? And I'm like, let's ask ChatGPT. And it had answers in seconds. It was just really fast. But 5 actually set me free because all of a sudden it was randomly slow or it was randomly crap. Its performance was so bad. I was like, okay, this is the sign that you should just get out. I have not had a good experience with 5. I know some people have. And I was listening to a podcast and people were talking about prompt engineering is back for 5. And I was like, that's a step backwards. We don't want people to have to build these complex prompts to get good results. I have such a better experience with Claude. The other thing is I spent a lot of time customizing. I went into the system instructions. All my projects have project instructions. They have context. I have different projects for the different kinds of things I do with it. I'm just getting used to asking it dumb questions, which it answers beautifully. OpenAI, of course, is problematic because it uses content moderators, which are underpaid and over-traumatized. It's problematic because of the water and electricity use. You know, the fact that Sam Altman perpetually lies and you can't trust a thing that comes out of his mouth is sort of alarming. So we shall see how it plays out. But I don't think so far, they don't seem to be actively killing anyone, which I can't say the same for X and Meta, arguably because they have no safeguards around their AI companions and around their therapy. They're leading to some very bad outcomes for people. It's really hard. OpenAI is not great either. They need safety guardrails. Like everybody else has. This is not legal. This is not a medical. Everybody else has to have warnings. Why doesn't AI have to have a warning which says, I'm not a trained therapist. Please seek help.
Well, I'm really struggling with, I believe it was reading Ethan Mollick's work at one point where he's been looking at other experts and speaking to other experts. And I think what they've said right now is the experts in this space are saying, oh, it's probably about a 10% chance that LLMs, Gen AI could lead to the destruction of humankind. Only a 10% chance. But I don't know. I don't feel really great about those odds.
10 people out of 100. No?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And I think it's possibly higher. The people who are going to be affected by it the most are going to be people who already have some sort of mental struggle. But we've also seen older people who are starting to have their mental capacity slow down, be badly affected. And even people who lean just a little bit towards paranoia can be set off. What the percentage is, I have no idea. Like, it could be higher easily, I think.
Yeah, as an author, as you've spoken and written to this, but I'd love to hear your lens as an author. There's something that I've been thinking about, especially now that you're using Claude quite a bit as a partner, but you're a renowned author. That's one of your identities, hats you've worn. These LLMs have stolen from you in many cases. And I did want to ask you, I've been using the LLMs. I am not a published author, but it's been helping me get my thoughts together as a partner, not writing a book, but it is helping me move forward with my writing. It must be very complicated, your relationship working with Claude.
It is a little bit complicated for sure. And I don't know if you just saw, but they just recently settled a case. So maybe I'll get some money off of that. It was a class action, which I joined, thank goodness. And it wasn't that they trained, unfortunately. It was that the books were pirated. So honestly, I've been really struggling to write anything. And if you see my blog, you'll see I wrote very rarely. And I co-wrote the speaker book with Danielle, and I don't think I could have written it without her. She's an amazing co-author. She really took a lot of my ideas and her ideas and the things we developed together and just structured it. And what I found is I went to Thailand in December, and I'm in a hotel room, and I'm just like, tell me a story about this. And it started telling me a story. And I was like, what if it was like this? I got excited again. I got thrilled. I felt playful. I had a sense, I had such a feeling like I have to write another Radical Focus. Is this it? Is that all I'm going to ever do that's going to be successful? And I think that pressure, I always wanted to write another one that was going to be that big. I think that kept me from writing. Playing with the LLMs, it reduced the effort, which gave me a lot of freedom to play with ideas that maybe I wouldn't necessarily play with. So I started with blogging. It's much better with short form. They're all still terrible with long form. They can't keep the plot at all, but they're all pretty good with short form. So I started with blogging and I started experimenting. Can I train a custom GPT? Not really. I ended up best with Claude and then a lot of custom instructions and context. And so what I do now is have really bad RSI. So typing and using a mouse for any length of time is almost impossible, which is another problem I run into. I can just blah, 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 dictate, dump all my ideas. It'll be like a half-written blog post and I'll say, clean this up, keep my style, keep my voice. And sometimes it'll ask me, who's this audience? Like I've actually gone into the instructions and said, ask me clarifying questions until you're 70% sure that you know what I'm asking for. So there's all these little tricks that I've kind of built into it. I've been told by people that 70% doesn't make any sense and shouldn't work, but it works. I get just the right amount of questions. If you just ask me questions before you write, it will ask you questions for the next 3 hours. So you have to have some kind of threshold. And these posts, I could see they were getting more and more views, getting more and more shares. I think for me, it's about how much of myself do I put into it and how much does the LLM bring to it?
Yeah, absolutely. You touched upon early when you were introducing yourself. You spoke about web girls. You
Mm-hmm.
also spoke a little bit about co-authoring, present yourself. So I mentioned to you that much of my audience, they're women, mid-career, senior career. A lot of them are women in tech. And I can tell from your work that this is a passionate topic for you, amplifying women, women in business, women in tech. I had wondered your experience. So this came to mind, and I'd love to hear your answer. You pivoted out of tech into teaching. I was recently speaking to Ala Weinberg and asking her, like, it's a messy, messy time in tech. And I was asking her for women, mid career, senior career, what they might want to consider doing now. And she said, what? They might want to consider getting out. Just not feeling like it's a supportive atmosphere for women. With your experience, you're still working in product management, you're teaching product management, you're still in the tech world, but you've slightly moved out. I'm curious what you would tell women who are considering making the shift out of tech.
Well, yeah, I still work on a consulting basis with companies who are trying to solve problems often around OKRs or strategy or product strategy and stuff. And other than that, yeah, teaching. But I think tech as an industry is ageist, it's misogynist, it's profoundly problematic culturally. And if you love technology, you're going to have to figure out where can I go where getting older is better. I think that as hard it is, ageism is for men, it's 1,000 times worse for women. As soon as you're no longer bangable, they don't seem to want to listen to you. And sometimes I wonder if they ever listened to me in the first place. So moving into teaching, like here I am at Stanford where knowing stuff is valued. I don't have to be hot, but I have to be knowledgeable. And I love that. Like I work really hard to stay on top of things and make sure I understand the latest trends. And that's where I've always been happiest. I was happy there in industry, staying on the bleeding edge, and I enjoy it here. So I would say for women, teaching might not be your bag, but ask yourself, where do they appreciate knowledge? Where do they appreciate wisdom? And maybe it means doing your tech job at a bank instead. What are the companies that don't mind if you're older? And you know what? Risk averse companies, I think, are really good. You know, tax like an Intuit, is a company. And also, I think the Midwest, maybe the South, is starved for talent. So I think if you're in the Silicon Valley, getting the hell out might be a good call. I'm not. And now I'm stuck here, I think, forever because I love Stanford and I never want to quit. But if you have that in you, if you can move, I think there's a lot of places that are really hungry for your knowledge. So you have to look farther out.
I've been hearing a lot of grief from some women because you're right. There is an acknowledgement that there's ageism, sexism. You get to a certain age, you're not seen anymore. But there's a lot of grief there because the women I speak to, they've never been better. They've never been more their best selves, both in their expertise in the tech world, but also just being themselves, their whole selves. And it's this disconnect between hitting that point where you're your best self, but the community and identity that you've been living just doesn't see you anymore. And I've been speaking with a lot of women where I appreciate your advice. There is, they do have some agency, but for those women who are still in the midst of the grief, do you have any message for them?
I prefer anger to sorrow. I find
that.
getting angry is like, fuck you. If you don't know how amazing, I'm cussing a lot on your podcast. I hope I don't mind.
Hey, that's okay. Free
My
reign.
feeling is, fuck all y'all. If you don't understand what you got, you don't get to get me. I'm going to go out and I'm going to find a place where I'm appreciated for the badass that I am. I mean, I am also a woman past a certain age. I tell my students, like, once you hit 50, you run out of fucks and then you're fine. And I think that very much certainly happened for me. I get angry, and you can see I always try to do something with my anger. That's why I started Women Talk Design. I was very active in Web Girls. I love yelling at people for having all male panels on LinkedIn. I will speak up. I just don't care because anger is what keeps me going. And it's not like I'm always angry. I love spending time with young women. That's the other thing I find helpful, is try to invest in that next generation as much as possible, which is very easy for me because I'm surrounded by them. But yeah, it just sucks. It just friggin'
Yeah.
sucks.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say. And it's wrong and it's upsetting. And if you can sue, sue. If you're willing to take on that, suing is a very emotionally painful and long and expensive journey. So you might not want to do that. But fine, get mad and then move on. You can't do anything with idiots.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And trying to fight the systems that have been in place forever, it's not a winning battle in most cases. Acknowledging it sucks because it does suck, but staying in denial that the life you had years ago is still there, it's not, and I think a lot of us had realized, like, stop trying to get back to where you are and move forward. It's
Yeah.
not moving on, it's moving forward.
And there are good companies. You just have
Yeah.
to be willing to do a lot more work to find them. Women-owned companies are often better than not always, of course, because sometimes women are horrible to women, but sometimes they're better. Nonprofits and social good companies tend to be better, more aligned with you. So you just have to poke around until you find someplace that does seem to take care of you. And that means keeping your network alive and having a lot of coffees and chats with people.
Yeah. Well, it didn't go unnoticed when you and Danielle Barnes, were publishing Present Yourself. It didn't go unnoticed by me. It wasn't promoted as a book of powerhouse women, but you brought in a bunch of powerhouse women collaborators to talk about that topic. So I'm wondering, was that something you and Danielle thought about? Did you want to promote this as a book for women or not? Or I noticed that you were rallying around badass women. And I'm curious what went into that process for you and Danielle.
We knew that the techniques we were teaching worked, and they worked for everybody. Like, they're just good principles. And even though Women Talk Design was very much focused on helping women feel comfortable enough to share their voices, and that came out of research that we did one year where we discovered that a lot of women are like, no, you should ask my colleague. He's probably better at it. So giving people the strength, the experience. We tried to make sure everybody had a headshot, just all the stupid little things that might slow you down. We wanted to make it as frictionless as possible, that if you had an idea, you could step up and share it. We also knew this is really great for people of color, a lot of the things, because we talk a lot about resilience and community. So we decided to just put it out there. I also feel separated is never going to be equal. And I really wanted a book that celebrated courage to speak and wasn't about one group, but it was for anybody who just needed some tools to move up.
Yeah.
And so that was definitely a decision. But yeah, you can see, I believe I do this. I don't have a textbook in any of my classes. What I do instead is I have a curating reading guide where there's readings, because I want to be able to represent. I want to have readings by trans people, by people of color, by women, by people who aren't from this country, disabilities, again, like everything. I want, because there's a story there. When you put those things together, it's a story about who is an expert in this world. And so when I can do that, my students could say, oh, I could be an expert because I see someone who's like me. I'm not a middle-aged white lady, but here's this interesting trans woman talking about the revolution in video games. Okay, I can see that that's a direction I could go into. It's a lot more work than just saying pick a textbook, because I have to curate it and update it all the time, but it's worth it because that experience is so great. Plus, a lot of these articles are really, really good. I think with a textbook, you're kind of stuck with your author's point of view, and this is a lot of points of view.
Yep. I had wanted to ask you, back to the women who are listening today, and a bunch of them have decided to start making a pivot. Some people think about pivot, it means blowing up your life and shifting. You don't speak about pivots or reinvention in that way. The women I'm speaking with, the same thing. It can be small shifts in terms of the direction you take. But for those women who are ready for a shift, there was a story I wanted to speak to you about, because I think it would be helpful for these women, where you were talking about where plans don't end up being plans you thought you want, may not necessarily be what you really want. And you were sharing your dream of moving to Belize. Can you share your story about your dream and where it landed for you?
Well, I always thought I had to get out of Silicon Valley at some point because they hate old people. I ended up in Belize as an accident. A friend of mine said, hey, Christina, you like ruins, you like snorkeling, go to Belize. And I was like, okay, I'll go to Belize. I just really loved it. I loved the people. I loved almost everything about it. And over time, I'd gone there like 4 or 5 times and made friends with a real estate person. And I had this wacky dream that maybe I could start a retreat center and have interesting people from all over the world come and run retreats. And I just had this total vision. And she said, here's a lot that you could build it on. And I bought the lot and had a little house. And I went through a lot of work taking this little box on stilts and turning it into a real home, working with local people to reinforce things and change the electricity and build out a big porch, blah, blah, blah. And I discovered going down there a lot that I didn't like being down there for any length of time, really. And I found an amazing property management company, these two Mayan women who do a badass job. And I realized I don't super love taking care of guests. I like it when they take care of the guests. So I've come to realize that this dream that I thought, oh, I'm going to retire, I'm going to run a retreat center, all these cool people are going to come there. The reality of it, from just running it as an Airbnb and going down there on a regular basis, made me realize I don't like this. I like coming down a couple weeks here and there and snorkeling and sitting in a hammock and reading books. I don't want to take on that job. And I'd have to build a lot more buildings. And that means I have to find honest people and I have to deal with watching over them so they don't screw you over because that's Belize and things are complicated, and then deal with the corruption of learning. I was just like, no, this is not what I want for my life. I like what I do. And I think women often are like, oh, I want a bookstore coffee shop. Like, who doesn't want a bookstore coffee shop? But do you really like making coffees all day? Do you really like day after day after day after day? And do people buy books these days? They still do, but it's not the same. Do I deal with all the regulation stuff? There's a lot of reality there. So by doing it in a small way, I ran into all the realities and made me change my mind about what I want to do when I retire.
So from your perspective, as you think back on the Belize experiment, that was a lean experiment. It was you doing things in a small way. I love that. But to me, it sounded very, very risky. Like that was a lot. But no, this was a small experiment for you.
Oh, yeah. Well, my God, land is much cheaper in Belize than it is in Palo Alto. Let me tell you that. My house cost in Belize cost 10 times less than my condo in Palo Alto, literally. So, yeah, it was not a big experiment. I know people get scared about things. I also, when I was working with my financial advisor, she had me do a risk assessment. I don't know if you've ever done this with financial advisors. They want to know your tolerance of risk. And afterwards, she was like, Christina, I've never seen anybody with a risk tolerance like yours. So I am an outlier. I'm very like, yeah, let's just try this and see what happens.
But isn't that also what led to, when you were telling about your career trajectory with your risk tolerance, it enabled you to take the jumps and take the actions. I've been hearing from a lot of people, I'm just moving. Maybe it's because I'm past 50 now, so I don't give a... But I just take action. You know, I try things, very lean experiments. And sometimes it's been described by others as off the cuff. I don't think of it that way. It's a lean experiment where I'm measuring and learning. But it sounds like very, very early on in your career, because you do have that risk tolerance, you've been okay with those little actions all along the way.
When I was younger, I used to go, well, I can always go back to waiting tables, which eventually became no longer true. But for a long time, when I was waiting tables, I was doing fine dining and I was making $80,000 a year, working 20 hours a week. And I could only imagine how much it would be now. So I had a backup. And I think that's the thing is I may be risk tolerant, but I always ask myself, what's the worst that can happen? Can I survive that? And I knew like, okay, so when I bought my place in Belize, I was like, one of two things will happen. I'll fall in love and know I want to retire here, or I'll sell it for a lot more money because I could see that the prices were going up. And I was like, well, there's no bad ending here. I mean, there's a small chance that prices would collapse because of global warming, but I thought that was a small enough odd that it was worth taking the bet.
Yeah. You've worn so many hats in your career, and it is something I wanted to ask you about, if there has ever been a moment of messiness and grief, like wearing the hat of design leader and product leader and head of a startup and working at startups, university professor, writer. Is there any identity that you've let go of that's no longer one of the hats you consider yourself wearing and it was tough to let go of?
I think one of the things that was hardest for me was the information architecture community. I mean, there was a point, you know, I was a leading figure in the information architecture community, right? And I had a leading voice and everything. And I wrote this blog post that said, you know, IA is like a pair of jeans that don't fit anymore. I have to discard it because my life has moved on. And everybody's like, IA is dead. And I was like, people, why? But for a long time, I was really struggling with the fact that I was being steadily forgotten in the IA community because I wasn't part of it anymore. for example, the IA Summit right now has a list of speakers who've spoken there. They're well known, and my face isn't there. And I'm like, how do I feel about that?
Yeah.
I'm no longer top of mind in IA. And I think I've made my peace with it, but it took a long time because I would say I am an IA. And even though I wasn't doing IA stuff since 2000, there was still a lot tied up in that identity. But it also taught me that your job should never be your identity. On my LinkedIn, I say I'm a curious human. I contain multitudes on my former Twitter bio. Like I want to embrace that all the things that make me me, and they are all over the place. They're board games, they're design, they're market analysis. I'm complicated and messy, and if people are upset that I don't fit in a short description, then that's their problem, not my problem. Because I'm here to be my complete self. Like you said earlier, I'm tired of editing myself for anybody else.
I hadn't even asked you about being a mom in the tech world. You were talking about consciously and intentionally making the shift that you did not want to be working the intensity that tech oftentimes involves. It was conscious choice for you. I'm wondering what message you'd say. I'm talking with women in the tech world, women with kids who, they range, but they're not yet at college and they're really thinking about that. Should I make a shift? Do you have any advice in terms of how to think about making more time for family? Because we do have a lot more of our lives beyond the work.
Yeah, that's another hard one. I will openly admit now that I basically hid my early childcare as a startup, which I did have. The thing is, a super early stage startup that's raised almost nothing, just a little bit of angel, you can kind of work very lightly. And so I did. And I made progress little bit by little bit, but I was able to spend a ton of time. I could breastfeed regularly. I could really be there with her. And that mattered a lot to me. And I did that for 2 years. Yeah, obviously, I was successful enough to sell the company. There were times when there were intense moments where I was super busy, but I was co-parenting. I think going through a divorce and working is really hard. I think that it's impossible to not have that pain and misery seep into your work. And I kind of wish I could have taken off time then, but it wasn't really feasible at that moment. Choosing to find a job where I wanted summers off, so I should have realized teaching was going to be it, so I could spend time with my daughter over the summer. But she's just too important to me. I don't care about a title. I don't care about anything as much as I care about my girl. I just dropped her off at college, and now I'm like, is it time to become crazily ambitious again or not? I don't know. We'll see.
Final question for you, Christina. So with your vast career and all of your lessons learned, if you could go back to the start of your career and tell yourself one thing, one major lesson you learned that you wish you had known at the start, right before you were reading Lou and Peter's book, perhaps, but what would you tell yourself back in that day?
Buy Apple stock.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it.
I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, I play this game way too much. I try not to do it because it's very easy to spend time ruminating on stuff in the past. It's hard not to say it will get better. I fought depression and anxiety most of my life, and the technology's finally gotten to the place where I don't suffer in the same way I did, but I suffered horribly for so long, and I would love to say it will get better. I think I would love to say, and I don't have to tell her, follow your nose, trust your gut, because my gut has led me to all these wonderful, interesting things. When I think about the things that I did that didn't work out, kind of don't mind them because they're part of who I am. My biggest one is always, should I have seen the signs with my ex-husband and not gone forward? But then there'd be no Quinn, and Quinn is amazing. Absolutely. And so that kind of becomes a lens on looking at everything else, which is sometimes things go wrong, but they're part of where I am and going right now. Like, I'd love to say, Christina, check into teaching early, but I think I'd be a different person. I'd be a different teacher. So I don't have a lot of that.
Yeah. Christina, thank you. Thank you for the time. We finally had our long chat.
Yeah.
What more? Thank you.
Okay. Excellent.